So the point of what we're doing here, it's all about remembering. We just want to remember. Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell speeches. He gave the speeches right before the Israelites crossed the Jordan River and go into the Promised Land. So it's a bit of a time of transition for them. And the word remember occurs a lot in Deuteronomy. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember that God delivered you from Pharaoh. Remember that he took care of you for 40 years. And the idea was you can look back and remember what God has done, and that can then give you confidence moving forward into an unknown future. And so that's what we want to do, is we want to remember well, with the idea that it would lead to gratitude and thankfulness in our hearts today, and it would give us confidence moving into tomorrow.
We have really been a part of Stonebridge since the very beginning.
I remember Tom Tanner saying that David Eldridge was leaving.
Wesleyan Fellowship was planting Stonebridge.
We just were walking on the square, and Lizzie said, "Hey, look at this church. Like, why don't we try this Sunday?"
I was part of the team that helped get Stonebridge started, which was kind of a story in itself.
We started coming to Stonebridge, which met in the cottages and the house.
When we started Stonebridge, we were meeting in a little house. We had 17 kids, and the majority of those kids were like first grade and under, very young.
When I think about this building and this place, literally working on the building,
We did a lot of the work ourselves. There were like all these random rooms and probably 6 or 7 different floorings and brick that was some exposed, some not.
and looking around and thinking about all the injuries and silliness that went on, and trying to pull this thing together.
When we started, the coffee area was still in the back of the sanctuary. And one time David was giving a sermon and someone got up to heat something up in the microwave.
It looked nothing like a church to begin with. It was a mess. But God had given us a vision, not just for being on the square, but what this place needed to look like and what this place needed to feel like for people to come in and meet with the Lord.
Think about the first renovation we did, the second renovation we did, and just to see what God has done with the small group of people we have and the needs that we had financially to do certain things. And I felt like he just met the need every single time.
I just kept getting drawn back to this church. I think David, in his honesty, like, I felt comfortable being here and didn't feel like I needed to put on a fake face or pretend like I was someone I wasn't.
When I think about the church and serving in the roles that I have on the church, I've really seen God at work, and he's just increased my faith a ton.
It is definitely a blessing to be here with this body, to worship with this body, and to grow with this body, and to serve this body.
One day it just kind of clicked, and we started coming more and more frequently, and we both found God here.
I feel like I want to know it better, but I know it better than I did along this journey a long time ago.
A year later, Brad and I, one Sunday morning, said, let's go visit David at Stonebridge and like fill some seats, like help him out. We walked into this building and the Spirit just hit us. It just fell, and the Holy Spirit was present. The room was full. We were not doing him any favors, and we never turned back. This was just like where we knew we were supposed to be.
It has been a blessing to be a part of Stonebridge. I have grown a lot.
My faith has increased a ton just seeing his faithfulness, and that we can lean on him, we can depend on him with the little things and the big things, and hiring staff, and just meeting the needs of our community.
It was just so exciting to see what God was going to do with this little group of people who were following what God had called them to do, that this vision and this purpose that God had spoken into David Eldridge, that we all just knew that we had to be a part of.
Stonebridge has been a place, it's been the great cloud of witnesses that has allowed me to throw off baggage and bondage and run the race that I was called to run, or do your deal, as David says.
I know it's become kind of cliche, the whole especially now that the church is not a building, it's the people. But a lot happened in these walls, and it is a little bittersweet to be leaving.
I had no idea what God was going to do and how he was going to just grow a ministry and grow this church, and most importantly, grow people that love the Lord.
It's a sad thing to think about moving to another spot, but I'm also encouraged that all the great memories we've had here, we're going to make tons of memories at the next spot.
So the way we're going to do that is different staff members are going to share, and they're going to share some things that they personally are thankful for in different areas of ministry. And the idea is not necessarily that you would be thankful for the same thing that they're thankful for, but more that it would provide some context and maybe spark some memories over the course of our time together. We're going to close with a time of corporate prayer where we are thanking God for what he's done. And so as you're listening to all of us talk, I hope that's what's kind of percolating in your heart and mind. Where has God met me in these buildings over the last however many years you've been here? And that leading, again, to gratitude and thanksgiving as we close our time together. So we've organized the morning through 3 themes: up, in, and out. And Katie and Kim are going to come up, and they're going to open us looking at in. That's discipleship, small groups, family ministries. And Jeremy and Matt are going to talk about out, long-term missionaries, local missions, short-term mission trips. And then I'll close by looking at up. What are some things that God has spoken to us and kind of formed us, used to form us as a people? Is that good? And so I'm going to say a prayer, and Katie, you and Kim can come on up. Holy Spirit, we do ask you to fill this place. You've been so faithful to do that week in and week out for us, and pray that you would again, that you would fill this place with your presence. I pray for each one of us as we're kind of marinating in memories this morning, regardless of how long we've been a part of Stonebridge. I pray that you would remind each of us personally of your goodness and of your faithfulness to us, and that would spark gratitude and thankfulness in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. So good to see you guys. Thank you guys for coming out. We're so grateful to have you here. When all of this started happening with coronavirus, I began praying and just asking God that we would get to gather in this space one more time. I was really hoping that we get to do that, and it looks a little different than we may have all expected, but it's been really sweet and even better than I could have imagined or asked for, just being able to have all these intimate gatherings with you guys. So thank you guys for coming out, and I'm looking forward just to celebrating all we've seen God do. And as David shared, we are going to, in this room, be focusing on this morning, be focusing on me and Katie, and we're going to look at that through the lens of discipleship. And I know discipleship is a loaded term. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, or a lot of things can come to your mind when you hear that word. But since the beginning, we've always believed that discipleship happens best along relational lines. That's being in relationship with people who love God and who love us. And the way that we see discipleship happening here, the grid that God has given us, is helping one another grow in our 4 anchors. So that's helping one another become more and more like Jesus, being conformed into his image, and helping each other learn to hear God's voice and to be led by his Spirit, and helping each other discover those good works that God has given us, our deal, and then walking those out in whatever places that God leads us and plants us, whether that's in our office, our neighborhood, or somewhere across the globe. And we believe that as more and more people grow in those things and mature in those things, that's how we see our community transformed, is more and more people becoming like Jesus and being led by his Spirit and doing those things that he's called us to do in the places where he sends us. One of the main expressions that we've seen of that at Stonebridge of discipleship is our small groups. When we first started back in 2008, we had that with small groups. 2008 was the first year we had small groups here, and we had 3 groups And over the years since then, we've grown, and now we have over 36 groups with more than 360 people participating. And so it's just amazing to see how people have just engaged in groups over the years and invested in one another. And I'm really thankful for everyone who has been willing to lead one of those groups. We've had some in this room that have led for over 11 years. Small groups here and investing in other people. And so I'm so thankful for the way you have sacrificially given of your time to pour out to others what God has given to you. And I'm also thankful for everyone who's been a part of a small group and has been willing to engage. We know that two giants in our city are busyness and exclusivity. And so I'm so grateful that you've been willing to give of your time and welcome others in and to your lives, and not just for an hour a week during small groups, but throughout your life, just through all the highs and lows and the trials of your life. So I'm so thankful for the ways you guys have loved on and taken care of each other and invested in one another and helping one another grow to become more like Jesus. Another area that I'm super thankful for in the area of discipleship and as we're looking in is for Deep Roots and Fit. David read something years ago that said the greatest gift you can give to your community is deep people. And so Deep Roots and then Fit were started with with that in mind, wanting to help people grow deeper in their relationship with God. And so I'm so grateful that that's been a place where David's been able to give away what God has given to him in addition to Sunday mornings. And for the over 260 people that we've had come through it since we've started in 2011, and just the hunger and desire we've seen in people wanting to grow deeper in their relationship with God, and then the fruit that has come out of that time with them. So I'm super grateful for that. So we want to show you what that looks like, not just for our adults, but across the generations. And so Katie's going to come up and share what that's looked like for our children and students.
I think in our children and our student ministries as well, we've seen year after year the Lord be faithful to call leaders to lead and disciple our kids. We're so thankful for all of the people who have come to lead kids, to give them wisdom and instruction and truth at the very beginning of their faith journey. It's a beautiful thing to see leaders who are living out those anchors, who have said yes to the Holy Spirit's call and where He's leading, who have said yes to the good works that God has them to do, and to be building up the next generation of the church. Several of you in this room have been part of that for years and years, and we're so thankful for your service and the way that set our kids up to know Jesus from their early years in their lives. So we're so thankful for that, and for your leadership and for your sacrifice. And we're also thankful to the Lord for all of the kids and students that He's brought through these ministries and brought to this building. We've seen hundreds of kids and students go through these ministries, and we're so grateful for getting to know them, for getting to see faith in Jesus through the eyes of our children. We're thankful to the Lord for what He's done in and through them as they shape their view of the church and of God and of themselves and who God created them to be. So we've seen lots of just goodness and fruit there, and we're so thankful for those relationships and for just for the body that the Lord's built in those ministries. As a fruit of all of this discipleship across the generations, one kind of measurable piece of fruit is baptisms, and people making a commitment to Christ and making a public declaration of their faith. Over the years at Stonebridge, we've been able to baptize 103 people. 66 children and students have been baptized here, and 37 adults. And we're just so thankful to the Lord for the things that He's done in and through this body, the way He's used those of you in this room to lead people to see the goodness of the gospel, to see the goodness of their Father in heaven, and to make a public declaration of their faith in Him, to become part of the body of Stonebridge and part of the family of God. We're so thankful to the Lord for that, and for the parts that all of you have played in welcoming people into God's family.
And as we've been focusing on discipleship and becoming more like Jesus, we see all throughout Scripture that Jesus served everywhere He went, washing His disciples' feet and serving those He met. And you guys are like Him in that you guys have served and given so much. so joyfully and so humbly. And so we're so grateful for that. David's desire has always been to help each of us to become more like Jesus and to become good citizens of the kingdom of God and not just good members of a church, not just good members of Stonebridge. And so I'm so grateful, though, for the ways that you guys serve, because as a family, we still have things to be taken care of here. So we want to be good citizens of the kingdom, but there's still things here at home that need to be done. When we first got started and meeting here, we had 15 people that served on Sunday mornings across the month. And now we have over 132 just for our adults that are on serve teams across the month, serving in so many ways, helping, greeting people as they come in the doors, taking up the offering, praying for people, helping on the worship team, at the computer and soundboard, helping things run. And so I'm so grateful for all the ways that you guys have served behind the scenes, done things that might not have even been noticed by many that or you felt like weren't important, but that helped others feel welcome and at home here when they came. And so we're so grateful for the ways you guys humbly and joyfully have served over the years. And Pathfinders need a ton of volunteers, and so they're going to share about what they have seen in their area.
Yeah, our ministry teams in Pathfinders and in the student ministry have both grown exponentially over the years. When Stonebridge started, there was no student ministry, there were no students, and so there were no volunteers. And now we've got 17 people who are pouring into and building relationship and discipling our 6th through 12th grade students every week in their small groups at youth. In Pathfinders, we started out with 4 volunteers per Sunday, and now we have 53 is our team per Sunday. There's 140 people, adults and students, middle school and high school students who serve with our children. And seek to build relationship and to make discipleship happen there. And so we're so thankful for that team. We're thankful for the sacrifices. It's not always easy to serve with children and middle schoolers and high schoolers, but it's always meaningful. And all of those acts of faithfulness, whether it's holding a crying baby, comforting a new mom, or a visiting family, giving our preschoolers and our elementary schoolers a firm foundation to build their faith on, to let them know who God is and who they are in his eyes, welcoming a middle school student and giving them a place to belong, or equipping our high schoolers to take their faith into their adulthood. They're little acts of service that add up over time. And I think it's beautiful that we see God's faithfulness reflected in his people and in your faithful acts of service to our kids and students. So we're thankful to you for that. We're thankful to the Lord for being faithful in those ways, being faithful to us so that we can be faithful to share his love and his good news.
And one final thing as we wrap up the end portion. So as we, before we even had small groups or anything else, we met to pray. We met every Tuesday night to pray corporately, and we've continued that on Tuesday mornings, but not only there in our small groups and in ministry teams and individuals and families that are interceding for our church family. And we are where we are today because of your prayers, because of your faithful prayers for our staff, for our church, and for this city. And so we are so thankful for all of your prayers. They have helped form and shape what God has been doing here. And so we thank you for the words of challenge and encouragement that have come out of your prayers. So I'm going to say a prayer now, and then Jeremy and Matt are going to come up and tell us about OUT. God, we thank you that you are such a good Father, and we thank you that you have invited us in and adopted us in as your children, as your sons and your daughters, and we thank you for the way you've knit us together as a family here. God, we thank you for every person that you've brought here and the way that you have grafted them into the body here. And God, we thank you for the transformation that we've seen in the lives, Lord, through your Spirit and through our love and encouragement and spurring on of one another. So God, we thank you for all you've done for us as a family, as a church body, and for the ways you've grown us and have led us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. Good to see y'all. So I've talked to a few of y'all over email and running into Richard every now and then and here and just kind of doing air high five. So it's good to see everybody in person again and to hang out with y'all for a little while this morning. Like David said, Matt and I are going to talk about not up. We're going to talk about out. We're going to talk about what Stonebridge has looked like since being planted here with this mission towards going out since the beginning, right? We come from a network that wants to plant churches, and we had that kind of ingrained in us early on. And I think really it shaped and formed part of our anchors, the idea of finding your Marietta, the place that God has called you, and doing your deal, those good works that God's prepared for us in advance to do. It's kind of a combination of that, and both of those are outward-looking anchors. And so for me, when I came here, I waited till all the work was done, and then I came in 2007. And one of the first things I did was join a small group. David was started doing your deal small group, and I was going there trying to figure out, like, what does this even mean, and what does it look like to do the things that God's called us to do. And one of my partners at our table was Josh Wheeler. So Josh and I became friends over that table, and then shortly after that, Josh went on into the field and to serve. And he's just one of the 18 missionaries that have left Stonebridge to go and do their deal. And I was thinking about that, like, I've done this differently every service so far. I was thinking about the terminology. I think yesterday I said we've sent 18 long-term missionaries. And I think maybe sent is the wrong word. I think the idea here, people come here to get empowered to go out and do their deal. And I think we've helped to empower, as a body, 18 long-term missionaries to go and serve around the world. And that's a huge number when you consider the number of people who started here and where we've grown to. 18 long-term missionaries is a big number. I think we've had 72 short-term trips. Over 680 individuals have gone on the short-term trips over the years. And it's been one of those things, it's been a huge explosion outwardly and outside the country we also see here. And I wasn't always, for me anyway, I wasn't really a mission-minded person. When I became a Christian, I became more about, like, how is God forming me? And I think I went to New Orleans a couple times after Katrina with a group of guys from here. And then finally, in 2012, I had never organized a mission trip. I had never led a mission trip. I had never prepared people to go on a mission trip because I'd never been on one. And I led one to Costa Rica with a bunch of high school students and a few sixth graders. And it was one of those things where I didn't know what I was doing. We figured it out as we went. And being there and doing the things and connecting with the people in Costa Rica like we did just got inside of me, and I couldn't get it out. And so it helped me, even just going on that trip, helped me figure out what my deal is and how I could do it here in Marietta as well as around the world. And so that's what a lot of you in this room have done, from Acts 6 to the Dwell Apartment Church to the Table on Delk, Grassroots, Park Street. There's all kinds of local ministries that we've seen where God has worked through people and worked through this church to help discover your deal and to go out and do it in the community. And so what I'm most thankful for when we look out is people willing to love their neighbors well. We've seen it, again, with these 18 missionaries who have left and gone to serve there. We see it, the local ministries that we see here, and it just continues even through this chaos that we're in now, with people giving to benevolence funds, people giving to the food bank, people serving at the food bank. We see that Stonebridge, it's in the DNA of who we are to go out and love our neighbors well. And I think that's what I'm most thankful about Stonebridge. And then I also think we love people who go well. We stay connected with them. Matt's going to share a little bit about his time in Cambodia, just about how we stay connected as a body going out.
All right, it's good to see you guys. I'm so glad you're able to come out today. And so for the 7 years that Katie and I were in Cambodia, Stonebridge was our home church. And even though going to Stonebridge looked like just going to the website, we were still able to stay connected with this body. And we felt like we were a part of this church for those 7 years we were away as well, because we constantly had you, our members of the church, emailing, connecting with us, wanting to know, how are we doing? What is ministry looking like? And what is God doing in Cambodia through our family? And so our relationship with Stonebridge looked, I would say, very different than a lot of other missionaries in our city. that was really in common. I feel like we were able to really feel like we were supported well, that we had people that cared for us and people that wanted to invest time and energy into our family, to see that we would be sent and cared for well. And so this is really uncommon in the city that we were in, and other missionaries didn't feel like they had the support nearly of what Katie and I felt like. And then when I told them that our senior pastor was going to come visit for about 4 days and that he was traveling around the world to be able to meet with and see the other missionaries that Stonebridge supports, I don't think they believed it, because no one really ever heard of that. And I said, that's really the church that we come from. We come from a church that really does care well for our missionaries. And I'm so thankful for you, for all the conversations that we've had with all the members of Stonebridge for those 7 years that we were away. We still felt connected and felt like we were cared for and sent well. I'm also thankful for a church that has prioritized helping people put their finger on exactly how God has gifted them and helping them find the opportunities where they could serve and walk in the things that God has prepared for them. We call this doing your deal. And I'm just looking around the room and I see just a variety of different doing your deals, different opportunities that you guys have stepped into in ministries that have really blessed our city. And so I'm thankful for a church that has prioritized and put importance on people really being able to put their finger on and say, this is how God has gifted me, and this is what he is leading me to do my deal, or to step into the good works that he has prepared for us to do. And so for me, this is incredibly important. I was thinking back when we were praying for these services, and I feel like I was reminded of this idea that through all the mission trips, through all the long-term missionaries, and through all of the local ministries and everyone doing their deal, there's literally been thousands of seeds that have been spread of the gospel of Jesus and his love and hope for our world. And so it's an incredible thing that God has really opened up our hearts and eyes to what it looks like to look out, to go out, to speak out, and to be sent out. And so let's go ahead and spend a couple minutes in prayer thanking God for all he's done in us. God, we're so thankful, Lord, that you have, first of all, you've transformed our lives, Lord. You've given us the hope of Jesus, and that you've invited us to be partners with what you are doing, to be ambassadors of your message and of your name, and that we get to be the hands and feet of you, Jesus, in our communities and around the world. God, we're so thankful for the opportunity, and that you have opened up our hearts and our eyes to being a part of seeing the kingdom come in Marietta and Atlanta and around the world. God, we're thankful for all the different ways that you have stirred opportunities for us to serve and to love others well. And we just spend this time, Lord, remembering, seeing the slideshows and all the opportunities and times where we have been able to serve others. And we just give you all the glory and all the credit and say thank you, God, that this all originated from your heart, that we could be able to love others well. And we thank you for this time. And we praise you. And we pray. Amen.
This is it. This is where we started. This was all we had. Back wall, front wall, side walls. We did everything in this one little 3,600 square foot room. This was sanctuary / kitchen. Not the greatest design decision in the world. It was all we could do. We had 3 rooms, 2 for babies and toddlers, and a conference room that we also used for elementary school kids and for small groups during the week. And we thought it was appropriate for us to be in here one last time. There are things that we're all going to miss about being here. I don't know. I was had breakfast with a guy this morning. And I was like, what's special about it? It's a building, and it's really not even that nice a building. Why do we have these attachments to it? And I think we all have memories of the Lord meeting us in these places. There's some things that we're not going to miss. I was here on Saturday. We record on Saturday. And now when I was upstairs and I went into one of the kids' classrooms, and there was a dead crow laying in the middle of the floor. All the windows were closed. There's no hole in the ceiling. It's got a floor. No doors are open. I have no idea how the bird got in there, and I have no idea how it died. We're not going to miss that. But there are some things that we are going to miss about being here. I have kind of a unique role. I'm not responsible for any ministry area like Jeremy and Matt and Katie are. I kind of can sit back and look at more of the big picture of the church. And so that's how I'm going to share, kind of looking from that perspective. And in my job, I wear two different hats. We're an organization, and we have budgets and facilities and employees, and I'm the president of that. And we're also a congregation, and we worship and we pray and we disciple each other, and I'm the pastor of that group. And so I want to look at some things I'm thankful for through each one of those lenses, wearing each one of those hats. And the common denominator is the idea of God's faithfulness. When I think of faithfulness, I think God does what he said he would do. And when I think about the way he's treated us, I feel like we've gotten more than that. It's more than we could have asked or imagined. I'm going to use the word faithful, but it's kind of to the nth degree. He's been so gracious and generous to us. So I think about the organization of the church. When a church planter gets started, every one of us feels this. None of us admit it. But we just don't know if we're going to be around in a week. Like, are people going to show up? Are they going to give? Are they going to come back? And those are the kinds of things that keep us up at night. Are we actually is this thing viable? And some areas where we've seen the Lord be faithful over the years, one that's super easy to count is just money. We kind of have to have it to go from week to week, and there's so much money has come through here in 13 years. But the thing I'm most excited about, 13 years we've given away over $2 million. Isn't that amazing? Over $2 million. Birth certificates, bus passes, prescriptions, rent, FCA, long-term missionaries, Park Street, Cobb pregnancy, hospital bills. $2 million from a church our size over 13 years. And that was all because at the very beginning, when it's hard to give because you don't have a lot, some guys said, we're not going to hold on to everything. 10% of what comes in is going to go out. And every year we've been able to give away at least 10% of the income that's come through. God's been faithful. I think about this building. We felt like God put us here. God called us to the square, and our landlord, she was a member at Roswell Street. For those of you who have Baptist roots, they had Lottie Moon Sunday, and they're talking about missions and missionaries, and then we call her really shortly after that Sunday, and she feels like we're her mission. And she doesn't give us a place for free, but she certainly kind of rolled out the red carpet for us and gave us a free pass to renovate it and do what we wanted with the building. She's been a wonderful landlord, and we felt like God put us here in this room. And originally, this was the front. We didn't have a stage. We just had a carpet. Got about 110 chairs, and we started meeting, and it was great. And then we went to 2 services, and it was great. And then we started getting kind of squeezed, and we were thinking, God has called us here, and we put a lot of money into this place, but we don't really have there's nowhere to go. That's a street, and that's a parking lot, and that's a parking lot. The only place to go is to the left. But if we want to be good neighbors, we can't really pray for the guys to the left to go out of business. So what are we supposed to do? And you'll see there on that timeline 4 different times when we need a building, one to the left opened up. It's amazing when I think about all of the circumstances that have to come together for us. There literally is only one direction for us to go when it's next door. And next door opens up, not once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times in 13 years. We never worked a deal with the landlords. We never prayed that anybody would lose their business or decide to leave. Everything was above board, and every time when we needed it, God gave us a building. Amazing to me. I think about our leadership. We realized really quickly we wouldn't be able to hire enough people to lead the congregation. It was impossible for us. And God, from the beginning, quality leaders. The health of our church is based primarily on the faithfulness of God, but right underneath it is the health of the leaders who God has raised up, and that's many of you. Kim and Katie talked about people who serve so faithfully, and again, I'm not responsible for a ministry area, so I think more of these leadership teams that are kind of help us lead the church as a whole. That's had lots of iterations. We've had a leadership team. We've had a leadership team and a finance team. We've had administrative elders and ministry elders. We've had an administrative team and a ministry leadership team, and even as the structure has changed, what's remained the same is the quality of the people who said yes. people with families, people with jobs, people who run their own businesses, who've taken on significant amounts of commitment and responsibility to say, yeah, I'm going to help lead this thing. And when somebody would roll off and I would think, oh, they were wonderful, and then somebody else would step up. God would raise somebody else up at just the right time. The dependability, the consistency, the faithfulness of those teams. You see the number, the ministry team leaders, you can't even read the print small, how many people have said yes to that. I remember a few years ago, we did a thank you dinner. Some of you were there. And the word that I had for this group of people was ballast. I'm not really a boat guy, but the idea of the weight in the hull of a ship that keeps it from capsizing in rocky waters. And we've had some rocky waters as a church. But for many people who've come through, they have not experienced that. And that's because of the spiritual weight of our leaders, their consistency, their dependability, and their faithfulness. For me personally, the admin guys, nobody's more important than anybody else, but that admin team has been so helpful to me. I have a master's of divinity. I do not have a master's in business administration. I remember the first time I had a meeting with some finance guys, and they said, let's go through our finances. I assumed that what we would do is like look at a checkbook, and they pulled out a P&L statement, which I had never seen one in my entire life. I didn't know how to read it. I didn't know how to hire people. I didn't know how to negotiate a lease. I didn't know anything about running a business. A big part of my job. I didn't know anything about it. And these guys from the beginning, you'll see their names there on the screen. Again, the people have changed, but what's remained consistent is the character and the attitude and the commitment of those guys. You know, they never made me feel dumb. They never tried to manipulate. We've never had a power struggle, which is amazing in a church. We've never had a political battle. They've been supportive. They've been encouraging. They've challenged when appropriate in ways that were kind and loving. Again, I think a large part of the health of our church is based on the quality of those folks who've come through as administrative and ministry leaders. I think about our staff. We've had a wonderful staff. Had a wonderful staff from the beginning when we couldn't even afford to pay anybody. At the beginning, it was just me. Penny was working full time and was a single mom, and somehow she carved out some hours to create this incredible children's ministry. Bo and Les and Ashley were volunteer worship leaders, and worship actually for us was pretty interesting in those early days. Bo plays the guitar and sings, and Les plays the guitar and he can sing background, and Ashley sings, but that was kind of it in terms of consistency. We had a guy that could play the drums. We didn't have a bass player, and you can't really have a drum kit without a bass player, and our drummer was also our sound guy, and you can't do both of those things at the same time. And so every Sunday, it was kind of like Meet the Band. I don't know where Bo got people, but he would get whoever he got, and they played whatever instrument they happened to play, and they would be over there on that rug. And at that time, it was maybe like 2008 or so, and we had a little bit extra money, and some of the larger churches were paying their musicians. And so there was this conversation, should we try to go out and pay some guys to come in and play on Sunday? It would give us some consistency. Bo wouldn't have to constantly be trying to recruit people. It would give us a little bit of leverage with folks because we'd be paying them, so maybe we could expect a little bit more. And as we were talking about that, I felt like the Lord said to me pretty clearly, play the hand that you're dealt. Just like Kenny Rogers. God doesn't often speak like him, but he did in that moment. Play the hand that you're dealt. And so what we decided was we would develop people versus trying to go out and hire the most talented person that we could afford. It was a intentional decision on our part. And if you look at the names on that staff list, you'll notice that almost every one of them came from within the church. Not all, and it doesn't mean we'll never hire somebody from outside. But in general, those people have come up through the church, and which is incredibly encouraging to me to think that we've created an environment collectively where people can discern a calling into ministry and have an opportunity to walk that calling out in the church that they've already chosen to go to. Before we paid them a dime, they've already said, this is my church and I love what's happening here. Wonderful testimony to me of God's faithfulness. Again, that from a congregation our size, we've had that number and that quality of staff members. Those are some things when I think about our organization that have been super helpful. If I take off the president hat and put on the pastor hat, 4 words that God wrote on my heart pretty early, and you might not have ever heard me say these things, but I hope you felt the impact of them in terms of the culture of our church. When a church planter gets started, one of the things we all feel pretty quickly is pressure to produce and to perform. We got to make a name for ourselves, and the city needs to know what the church stands for and what we're doing, and we got to get people in the door and get them to give money and launch programs and do ministries and get busy. And I was feeling that when we came. It was just me here during the day, and I was kind of bouncing around the walls and wondering what am I supposed to be doing. And then I heard this rumor, mega church in West Cobb, planting a church on the Strand with 400 people. My first thought wasn't great. I thought, they're going to eat our lunch. Everybody's leaving. We can't compete with that. So I called the guy who was leading the church, and we went out to lunch. Turned out to be a good friend of mine. We went to, it used to be Applebee's on Dallas Highway. Now it's a Mexican restaurant. And we met there, and I just looked like me. And he was dressed really nice. He looked like Jimmy. And then he had an executive pastor who also looked like Jimmy. Two really nice looking guys who come in, and we sit down and we play the name game, who knows who. And once we get through that, his first question, where are you going to be in 5 years? And I said, man, I just hope we're around in 5 years. What about you? And he has a plan. We want to be in bricks and mortar. That was a phrase he used. We got some land in West Cobb we're looking at. We've got $50,000 in the bank, and we're building. We're moving towards this. And I started getting pretty nervous about my lack of a plan. And then he says, what are you going to do with people? And I said, I just hope they come back next Sunday. What about you? And he pulls out this glossy trifold brochure with a baseball diamond in it. And he says, we got first base, and then we move them to second base, and we move them to third base, and then they get home, and this is all the things that have happened in their life. He has a glossy trifold, and we don't even have a printer. And I'm thinking, man, we're in the wrong business. And so one Sunday, really shortly after that, Logan Weber, many of you know him, you know his mom Cindy still comes to church here. He stands up on the rug and says, I feel like I have a word for the church. Psalm everybody knows, 127, unless the Lord builds a house, you labor in vain. Takes all the pressure off of me. It's not my response. I don't have to have a 5-year plan or a glossy brochure. It's God's responsibility to build the church. It's not mine. And that also means it's God's privilege to determine what the church looks like, not mine. I realized in the equation I was acting like the horse and I was really the cart. God gets to determine what the church looks like, and then he's responsible for building it. My job is just to be faithful with what he's put in front of me. Around the same time, this phrase, act your age, started swirling around in my heart. We came from Riverstone. Many of you are familiar with that church. At that point, the church was kind of hitting on all cylinders. They just moved in this great building on Stylesboro Road, tons of great ministries going on, and it wasn't too long before people started asking, hey, when are we going to fill in the blank? And I don't think anybody meant anything by it in terms of pressure or expectation. I think it was just genuine questions. But in my insecurity, that's what I felt. I was like, oh, they want us to do all these things, and I can't do all of those things. And in that moment, I felt like what the Lord said was just act your age. And I thought about my own kids who are spaced out a decent bit, and we have different expectations for them at different ages. And things that are appropriate when you're 3 are not appropriate when you're 13 or not appropriate when you're 23. There's freedom and responsibility at each age that's age appropriate. And neither is better than the other. The point is to embrace whatever age you happen to be. Took all the pressure off for me. We don't have to act like we're older or bigger than we are. There are things we can do with 40 people that we can never do if we wind up with 200 people. There are things that are okay when you're 6 months old that may not be okay when you're 6 years old. And again, neither is better or worse, but just embrace the stage, act your age. And so both of those things took pressure off of me, and I hope the result for you, I hope what you felt in terms of culture, is this has been a place where you can rest and relax and flourish, not a place where you felt driven. Like, get more people, get your friends to come, give more money, serve more. I hope you've never felt that from us. And if not, it's because of those words that I think have shaped our culture. We haven't felt pressure to build something. We've trusted the Lord to do that. 2 others, those words were about a responsibility and expectations. These are about ministry and people. That phrase, doing your deal, I know it's really corny. It's something that was kind of percolating in my mind and heart for several months. Kim mentioned we used to have Tuesday night prayer, and I remember one night at Tuesday night prayer, it wasn't a breakdown, but I just got to this point where I was saying to the Lord, I feel like I'm a bottleneck. Like everything is having to go through me, and I don't have the capacity to handle all of it. We want to see a community transformed, and that can't all run through me or whatever staff we wind up having. And I went and I sat on a bench on the square. I was looking out towards First Baptist. I don't usually see pictures, but I saw this picture of a wooden crate. with a bunch of empty Coke bottles and a pitcher of water being poured in the bottles. And what I felt like the Lord said was, if the issue is that you're a bottleneck, then the solution is to get more bottles. And that's where doing your deal came from. And that's why it's so important to us. It changed everything for me. Like, my responsibility was not to try to get Richard and Steve to run the race that God's put in front of me. It was to say, what's God put in your heart? Turns out to be Acts 6, one of the most flourishing ministries we've ever had. I never would have thought of that. If that had to come through me, then it wouldn't have happened. And many of you were involved in that ministry. One of the most life-giving things I've seen in a church in the last 10 years. I had nothing to do with it, except to say yes. Changed everything for me. In terms of the way I approached people, it wasn't about me trying to get people into a slot, pigeonhole people into a role. It was to say, God's got a calling on everybody's life, and my responsibility is just to fan the flame. It's just to figure out how we as a church can spur people on to love and to the good deeds that God's put in their heart. I used to get grouchy every October, and I didn't know why. And then I started realizing this is happening every year. And we would do this thing after Thanksgiving, these family dinners. Many of you came to these family dinners, and we kind of do a state of the church. And I realized I hated that, even though it was my idea. So Penny would stand up and say, here's what's happening in Pathfinders. And David would stand up and say, here's what's happening with students. And I would stand up and say, here's what's happening with the church as a whole. And I realized in that moment, I felt pressure to have like great looking graphs that go up and to the right. We want to show all the ways that we're growing. But the things that we cared about the most, you can't put on a graph. You can't count them and you can't measure them. And it created this tension around what we were sharing and the fruit that we were valuing. And I remember the Lord said, at what point are you going to quit trying to take credit for what I'm doing and just start taking joy in what I'm doing? And that changed things for me as well. It didn't matter what we could put on our resume as a church. Look at all the great things that we've done. It didn't matter whether we get any credit for the table on Delt because Tina goes to church here. It just said, let's just take joy in the fact that she's doing that and figure out how to support her. Let's just take joy in the fact that God's working in our city, and we don't even know necessarily what our part always is. We're just happy to have a part to play. And again, I hope the result for both of those things for you is that you've felt encouraged and supported and, I would say moved to move forward, but never compelled or cajoled to do something that you didn't feel led to do. And that can be kind of a fine line. I certainly don't want us to be complacent, but I don't want anybody to feel pressured. And I think, again, there's a fine line there where we all have a sense of, hey, God's calling me to do something. I need to be faithful to that. We want to support those things without people feeling this burden to go out and make something happen or to do what I want you to do. We're going to close with three things. We're going to watch a video. A guy named Brent Shoemaker asked if he could address us on our last service, and you'll see why as he begins to talk. Then Bo's going to come up and sing a song. Apparently one of the worst things we can do right now is sing. That makes us super spreaders. So we're just going to listen as Bo sings. Hopefully, I think we'll be able to sing in a couple of weeks, but not today. Yeah, so we're not going to sing. Bo's going to sing. It'll be like your Behold song. And as Bo is singing this song, this is what I want you thinking about. Just asking the Lord, where have you met me in this place? And then when Bo's done, we'll have a time of corporate prayer. And people who are comfortable praying out loud, I would love for you to pray out loud. If you're not comfortable, you don't have to. And they need short prayers. Nobody needs to pray for 3 minutes. Just 10, 15 seconds. God, I'm thankful that y'all know how to pray. So just brief prayers of thanksgiving for the ways the Lord has met you here. And then I'll close us out after a couple of minutes.
Good morning, Stonebridge, or afternoon or evening. Whatever service you're attending. I know you have a lot of services going on. My name is Brent, and I'm the pastor at City Church Marietta that's been meeting right down the street at the Strand Theater. And man, you're probably wondering why I'm here today at your last gathering. I did ask permission to be here. But the reason that I'm here with you today is, many of you may know this, or you may not know this, that City Church is moving into the space in the building that you've courageously and faithfully built for the last 13 years. We're moving into the rooms that you've worshiped in, the rooms that you've laughed in, cried in, mourned in, learned in, built community in those rooms, served faithfully in those rooms. Many of you have watched your kids grow up in this space. You've cared for so many people in these rooms, and you've served the city so well in this space, in this building, and we get to occupy it. It doesn't seem fair, but let me say this. First of all, I want to say this. I'm sorry for some of you. I know how difficult it must be for some of you to say goodbye to all those amazing experiences and memories. And as exciting as this new chapter is for you, I do acknowledge that for some of you, this is a difficult time. And our church is praying for you during this transition. We're praying that God gives you grace and mercy as you say goodbye, and grace and mercy as you move forward. But really the main thing that I wanted to communicate today, and I don't even know how to communicate it adequately, but I just wanted to say this from the sincerest part of my heart. I wanted to say thank you. Man, thank you so much for believing in our little church. Thank you for your faithfulness and your generosity to the Lord, to the city, and thank you for your generosity and faithfulness to our church, City Church. It's been unbelievable. You've inspired us and motivated us and challenged us, but I'm blown away personally at how you've treated us. From the very first day we started this church, David and your team and many of you did not view us as some sort of competition on the square, but you viewed us as an opportunity to invest into our story and our future and help us succeed so that we could introduce and more people could find and meet Jesus. And from the very beginning, that was your approach. And I was just amazed at that. And it was almost as if you knew this day was coming for your church, when your church would leave and a new church would come in. And you've very faithfully prepared for that. And you've prepared us for that. So I want to say thank you for your generosity and your humility toward our church. And thank you for laying down a foundation for us to continue the work that you've started on the square. Man, I know we have incredibly big shoes to fill. And honestly, I have no idea how we're even going to come close to doing that. We're going to try, but I'm reminded of something that your pastor, David, told me when we launched our church way back then on a wing and a prayer. He reminded me that it's the Lord's responsibility to build the local church. And really, I've hung on to that truth ever since, and ups and downs, and like, are we going to make it? No, it's God's responsibility to build this church. So we want to be faithful, our church, to step where he leads us and trust that he's going to do the rest, and that one day we'll look back, just like you're looking back today, and go, wow, look what God has done. Look at all he's done. And that's our hope and our goal. So City Church, we rest in knowing that God will lead us and equip us and continue building on the legacy that you have left us. And so you're not just handing off a building, but you are handing off a foundation for the future and an investment into our future. And hopefully more people will meet Jesus. So I want to say thank you for that. When I think about your church, when I think about you, a couple of words come to mind. One of those is the word faithful, which I've already said. And just one quick story as a reminder, or just that captures that story of faithfulness. It was about 3 years ago on a Tuesday morning. Our staff meets at Starbucks. And man, it is difficult at times to pray and to have any kind of quiet time in Starbucks. We love it, but it's hard. So I reached out to Kim one Tuesday morning and said, Kim, could we come to Stonebridge, our staff, and just pray? And I was feeling heavy, and honestly, I was feeling anxious and stressed out and looking at our finances, and I wasn't sure how we were going to make it, and there were things that were ahead of us. And so I felt like our team needed just a place to pray and specifically ask the Lord to provide $50,000 for our church. And so we pull over to Stonebridge and we walk in, and David is right there to meet us. And David hands me an envelope and he says, here's the deal. I don't even know what's in it, but somebody in our church wanted you to have this gift right here. It's for you. And I just took it and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And so we walk over into your sanctuary, your worship center, and as we kneel to pray, we just opened the envelope, and it was this very generous cash gift to our church. And it was so amazing. It was just unbelievable. Here we are kneeling to pray for provision for our church, and you meet us with an envelope. And really, it didn't matter what the amount was. It could have been, $5. It could have been, $1. It didn't matter. It was just a reminder to us that God has gone before us. It was a reminder to us that God is faithful and that God is in it with us and He's for us. And you got to be a part of that. And then a week later, out of the blue, we received a $60,000 gift toward our church. So I say all this to say this, to share this with you. Obviously, I'm highlighting the Lord's faithfulness, but I'm also highlighting your faithfulness as well. This is really just one example of many, many, many examples where you have been faithful and generous to our church. It could have been in the form of an envelope or a word of encouragement or prayer or using your space for free over and over again, but you have been faithful and you've been generous to our church so many times. And every time we look back and go, God, thank you. Every time we look back and go, God, you're reminding us that you're in it with us and you're for us. Every time we look back and go, we're not alone. So thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for being an instrument in God's hands to remind us of His faithfulness as well. So I also think about this when I think of your church, and I'll wrap up. I think of this. I think of the phrase, this phrase comes to my mind, the phrase standing on your shoulders. You may have heard that. You may have used it before. And just as a parent would hold his or her child up on their shoulders to see something, I feel that way that you've done that with us. You've lifted us up on your shoulders so that we can see more of God's faithfulness and more of God's generosity and more of Jesus. And we're grateful for that. And just as a parent would lay a foundation for their children to go further and to succeed in life, that's what you've done for us. We know that we're here today because of your strong shoulders. If it weren't for your faithful, generous shoulders, City Church would not be at the place it is today. Your shoulders have laid the foundation for us to grow and to mature, and man, hopefully in this next season to even soar. So to the staff, to the original core group of Stonebridge, and to everyone, we want to say thank you so much for allowing us to stand on your faithful shoulders. Thanks.
So I hope for you, and however long you've been here in these walls, that I know you've experienced the Lord, and I hope the culture that you've been a part of is one where you have been able to rest, where you have been able to engage the Lord, where maybe for some of you it's been a place where you can heal, maybe a place for you to be able to slow down a little bit, coming out of busy seasons of life or of service. It's been a place where I hope you've been able to hear the Lord and maybe been renewed in your own sense of calling and ministry.
Yes, I will sing of the goodness